Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
Bandwidth for TWiT specials is provided by Cachefly at CACHEFLY.com. Alex, Lindsay, and Tom Merritt are joining me on the set. We're going to see if we can get some comment from some other people in the Apple community. What do you think, Alex?
Well, I'm mostly just worried about Steve Jobs. I mean, this does not bode well for the health issues that he's had. Of course, there's nothing in the news about that, but we can only assume.
You in no way could say this was expected, however.
What?
I mean, you couldn't in any way say that this is something that had been in the works or expected. So you're right. It lends one to think that maybe something
is getting more
taken
serious.
a turn for the worse. Yeah.
So that's what I'm hoping not is the case, but it appears that's
well, and he says himself in that letter, when I'm unable to execute the duties, and that does not bode well. No.
Right. He says, I've always said if there ever came a day when I could no longer meet my duties and expectations as Apple CEO, I would be the first to let you know. Unfortunately, that day has come. So it is an admission of.
Now, there's a few things people are going to speculate besides just his health, which is this why the Steve Jobs biography got moved up? Publication date is coming sooner.
That's a good point. They moved it up 6 months.
Is this why we have a delay of the release of possible products being rumored sort of all over the place because maybe they're not sure exactly what they want to do about that?
The letter, I have to say, does seem a little bit like a requiem. His last sentence is, I've made some of my best friends of my life at Apple, and I thank you all for the many years of being able to work alongside you. Andy Ihnatko joins us now. Andy, your thoughts?
Honestly, it's like getting kicked in the gut because there's very little to debate about the content of that message. I've just heard about this myself just 10 or 15 minutes ago.
As we all did.
And whereas with previous messages, they were very frank, but you could at least hold out certain amounts of hope that health problems could be surmounted. This really does seem like the message that says that I'm afraid that someone's going to be minus a husband and minus a father sometime very soon.
Tim Cook.
I'm sorry to put it that way. I'm sorry.
I think that's.
I've lost some people close to me that way before. So
yeah, I think that's what we're all thinking and hoping is not the case. But I think it's hard to not go there. Tim Cook was always the man everybody expected would take the reins at Apple. He was clearly being groomed. He had spoken on stage during several keynotes. He's the chief operating officer and as such had the most direct role running the company. But an Apple without Steve Jobs is truly a company without its leader. I mean, there's no question that Steve Jobs didn't merely run Apple, but it was his vision and his creativity and his talent that made Apple the company that it is. You think back to the milestones in his career, and in every case, he took a product that perhaps existed already, but popularized it, made it successful, made it work, starting with the Apple II computer, which wasn't the first personal computer, but it was the first successful personal computer. The iPod wasn't the first MP3 player, it was the first successful MP3 player. The iPhone wasn't the first smartphone, it was just the best smartphone. And of course, Steve Jobs takes all the responsibility really for the creation of the Macintosh team. He raised the pirate flag on a building in Cupertino and said, we're going to do something very different, and in 1984 introduced a computer that really changed the world. And then in every case, I think you can say that it was Steve Jobs' vision and creativity and talent bringing together a group of very, very talented people. And this was the secret of his success. He was able to make successful mass appeal products out of technology in a way that no one else has ever been able to do.
Well, yeah, and I think that his ability to synthesize something new out of stuff that already existed is really and really focusing on what actually mattered about what a product was going to do is what has really set a lot of the Apple products apart for decades.
Yeah, it really is a question. He is a leader in every sense of the word. People often sort of, if they're looking to say something critical, they always say, "Oh, well, geez, he's not an engineer, he's not an inventor," and that's probably true. His most important role at Apple, not only in the industry, is the ability to see where things are going in 5 years, not to create the invention, not to create the ideas, but identify the one that every single resource at Apple needs to be marshaled against. There was a story from the Mac Hack Developer Conference from 10 years ago when the show reunited almost all of the primary members of the Macintosh development team for a major anniversary of the Mac, and it really was everybody except for Steve Jobs. And Bill Atkinson told the story about how Bill Atkinson was responsible for developing the QuickTime routines. This is the primitives that are for drawing lines, drawing squares, drawing dots, everything from actual graphics to every single element of the Mac interface. And space was at such a huge premium that he was hand coding every single routine, and it was like figuring out what should go on an Apollo spacecraft. There was just such little space left for anything. And Steve Jobs, according to the story, came up to him and said, "You know what? We need rounded rectangles." And Atkinson says, "Oh, come on, you're nuts. We have so little time. We have so little space. We'll never use that." And then Steve took Bill on a walk around the Apple campus, and over that walk pointed out everything: traffic signs, license plates, cafeteria trays, all these things that are in nature that have rounded rectangles. And by the time they got back to the office, Bill said, "My God, he was absolutely right. We absolutely must, not just it's a good idea, we absolutely must have rounded rectangles in QuickDraw." And really, that's what he was able to do. He created the iPod not because he invented everything, but by saying, "It's important that we make this. I'm going to give you all my support employees. I'm going to give you all the focus of the company. You will be working on something important because the work you do here, the work you do now, the work you do today will rescue this company." And that's the sort of leadership that he was able to bring.
And let's be clear. I mean, some people in the chat room are pointing out Steve Jobs has not passed away.
We're not eulogizing him.
We're eulogizing his career as CEO, perhaps, and rightly so, because he has stepped down. He's resigned as CEO. He's no longer an active member of the company the way he has been since he returned. Back in the late 90s, but so I think it's appropriate to eulogize that a little bit because this man has done incredible things.
Although, as Robert Scoble points out on Twitter, that Steve is the now chairman of the board
and still an Apple employee,
and so he perhaps can lead from there and can steer the company from there. He's shown an amazing ability, even while very ill, to continue to run things. So. All is not lost, as Robert says.
I think he's going to continue to provide as much input as he can. I think that that they're still going to be looking to take advantage of his designs as long as they possibly can. So,
and yet, I can't imagine him resigning. Remember, he's taken now 2 medical leaves of absence.
Right.
I can't imagine him resigning unless he felt that really there was no way that he could continue as CEO, which makes me think it might be very difficult for him to do much, even as chairman of the board.
He had available to him the ability to say another indefinite leave of absence. This time he said that, "No, I don't feel as though I will be able to have the same role that I had before." And
So it's. I don't think we can underestimate the significance or the drama of this announcement. He is one of the original pioneers of Silicon Valley, and one of the greatest men, I think, in the industry. We have, I wouldn't mind playing a little bit of this clip. This is Steve Jobs in 2005 addressing the Stanford graduating class. And I think more than any other public pronouncement that Steve Jobs made, this kind of encapsulated his philosophy and his life. And I think it's a really great way to. Do you not have that? I can pull it up here if you keep looking. I'll see if you can get it. I would like to play this video if I can. You should be able to see it. No? We're also working on getting a number of people who we know, who of course knew Steve or know Steve, and we'll have some thoughts about this and perhaps some insight into this as well. Steve's illness is a form of liver cancer, a particularly virulent form of liver cancer. We know that he had a liver transplant how long has that been? A couple of years?
Not a couple of years now.
Yeah. And while he didn't seem to...
Well, and before that, before the transplant, of course, he had, I believe, his spleen, is that right, his spleen removed? Or there was a, he had cancer before. This is the second time that he had a mass at this, so...
and the fact of the matter is, he's taken 2 medical leaves,
right.
Both of which he's been very
cancer.
active during. In fact, during this most recent medical leave, he still got up and did keynotes and product presentations. So the fact that he would find that it was necessary for him to turn in a resignation means that something has changed in his condition, whatever that is. He is. My guess is he is saying, look, I'm not able to lead from leave anymore, so I'm going to hand over these responsibilities to Tim Cook. But in typical Steve Jobs fashion, he takes over as chairman of the Apple board, and he remains an Apple employee, so he is not relinquishing any amount of power that he doesn't feel he absolutely has to.
Right. We can be optimistic in the sense that it's possible that this move is that Steve believes that at some point there was going to need to be a transfer of power. He would like to, while he is still very active and has a good outlook for the next, let's say, year, 2, 3, that he would like to be able to be around and be there to sort of guide the transition, as opposed to, God forbid, sometimes simply saying, okay, you know what, the next week I'm just not going to be able to have a hand in any way in Apple affairs. And so I would not be surprised, based on what we know from his moves in the past, that he would at least like to have control over how the transition from the jobs era to the post-jobs era happens.
Let me play this Stanford address, because I think this is Steve in his own words, and perhaps no better words than Steve Jobs' own words. Well, I don't know if there is audio yet. Wait a second. No, you don't hear it. You're not getting any audio from this. Audio's on. I'd really like to play this. Let's pause for a second. Let me see. I believe you are controlling the audio. Once it's HDMI, I don't have any control of the audio. Let me look here real quickly. We're also calling around right now to try to find some people to comment. I wish there were some way we could take calls on the air from our audience. Do we have any way of doing that at this point? So you're not hearing any audio? Okay. I sure would like to play this. Well, we'll see if we can get that video in just a little bit. Those of you tuning in for Triangulation, I think we'll do this for a little while longer, and then we'll get to Kevin Mitnick on our plan. I think we'll do this for a little while longer, and then we'll get to Kevin Mitnick on our plan. I think we'll do this for a little while longer, and then we'll get to Kevin Mitnick on our plan.
I'm honored to be with you today for your commencement from one of the finest universities in the world. Truth be told, I never graduated from college, and this is the closest I've ever gotten to a college graduation. Today, I want to tell you 3 stories from my life. That's it. No big deal. Just 3 stories. The first story is about connecting the dots. I dropped out of Reed College after the first 6 months, but then stayed around as a drop-in for another 18 months or so before I really quit. So why'd I drop out? It started before I was born. My biological mother was a young, unwed graduate student, and she decided to put me up for adoption. She felt very strongly that I should be adopted by college graduates, so everything was all set for me to be adopted at birth by a lawyer and his wife. Except that when I popped out, they decided at the last minute that they really wanted a girl. So my parents, who were on a waiting list, got a call in the middle of the night asking, "We've got an unexpected baby boy. Do you want him?" They said, "Of course." My biological mother found out later that my mother had never graduated from college and that my father had never graduated from high school. She refused to sign the final adoption papers. She only relented a few months later when my parents promised that I would go to college. This was the start in my life. And 17 years later, I did go to college. But I naively chose a college that was almost as expensive as Stanford. And all of my working class parents' savings were being spent on my college tuition. After 6 months, I couldn't see the value in it. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life, and no idea how college was going to help me figure it out. And here I was, spending all of the money my parents had saved their entire life. So I decided to drop out and trust that it would all work out okay. It was pretty scary at the time, but looking back, it was one of the best decisions I ever made. The minute I dropped out, I could stop taking the required classes that didn't interest me and begin dropping in on the ones that looked far more interesting. It wasn't all romantic. I didn't have a dorm room, so I slept on the floor in friends' rooms. I returned Coke bottles for the 5-cent deposits to buy food with. And I would walk the 7 miles across town every Sunday night to get one good meal a week at the Hare Krishna temple. I loved it. And much of what I stumbled into by following my curiosity and intuition turned out to be priceless later on. Let me give you one example. Reed College at that time offered perhaps the best calligraphy instruction in the country. Throughout the campus, every poster, every label on every drawer was beautifully hand calligraphed. Because I had dropped out and didn't have to take the normal classes, I decided to take a calligraphy class to learn how to do this. I learned about serif and sans serif typefaces, about varying the amount of space between different letter combinations, about what makes great typography great. It was beautiful, historical, artistically subtle in a way that science can't capture, and I found it fascinating. None of this had even a hope of any practical application in my life. But 10 years later, when we were designing the first Macintosh computer, it all came back to me. And we designed it all into the Mac. It was the first computer with beautiful typography. If I had never dropped in on that single course in college, the Mac would have never had multiple typefaces or proportionally spaced fonts. And since Windows just copied the Mac, it's likely that no personal computer would have them.
Nice little jab there at Microsoft.
If I had never dropped out, I would have never dropped in on that calligraphy class, and personal computers might not have the wonderful typography that they do. Of course, it was impossible to connect the dots looking forward when I was in college, but it was very, very clear looking backwards 10 years later. Again, you can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future. You have to trust in something, your gut, destiny, life, karma, whatever. Because believing that the dots will connect down the road will give you the confidence to follow your heart, even when it leads you off the well-worn path. And that will make all the difference. My second story is about love and loss. I was lucky. I found what I loved to do early in life. Woz and I started Apple in my parents' garage when I was 20. We worked hard, and in 10 years, Apple had grown from just the two of us in a garage into a $2 billion company with over 4,000 employees. We just released our finest creation, the Macintosh, a year earlier, and I just turned 30. And then I got fired. How can you get fired from a company you started? Well, as Apple grew, we hired someone who I thought was very talented to run the company with me. And for the first year or so, things went well. But then our visions of the future began to diverge, and eventually we had a falling out. When we did, our board of directors sided with him. And so at 30, I was out, and very publicly out. What had been the focus of my entire adult life was gone, and it was devastating. I really didn't know what to do for a few months. I felt that I had let the previous generation of entrepreneurs down, that I had dropped the baton as it was being passed to me. I met with David Packard and Bob Noyce and tried to apologize for screwing up so badly. I was a very public failure, and I even thought about running away from the valley. But something slowly began to dawn on me. I still loved what I did. The turn of events at Apple had not changed that one bit. I'd been rejected, but I was still in love. And so I decided to start over. I didn't see it then, but it turned out that getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. The heaviness of being successful was replaced by the lightness of being a beginner again, less sure about everything. It freed me to enter one of the most creative periods of my life. During the next 5 years, I started a company named Next, another company named Pixar, and fell in love with an amazing woman who would become my wife. Pixar went on to create the world's first computer-animated feature film, Toy Story, and is now the most successful animation studio in the world. In a remarkable turn of events, Apple bought Next, and I returned to Apple, and the technology we developed at Next is at the heart of Apple's current renaissance. And Lorene and I have a wonderful family together. I'm pretty sure none of this would have happened if I hadn't been fired from Apple. It was awful tasting medicine, but I guess the patient needed it. Sometimes life's going to hit you in the head with a brick. Don't lose faith. I'm convinced that the only thing that kept me going was that I loved what I did. You've got to find what you love. And that is as true for work as it is for your lovers. Your work is going to fill a large part of your life. And the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking and don't settle. As with all matters of the heart, you'll know when you find it. And like any great relationship, it just gets better and better as the years roll on. So keep looking. Don't settle. My third story is about death. When I was 17, I read a quote that went something like, "If you live each day as if it was your last, someday you'll most certainly be right." It made an impression on me, and since then, for the past 33 years, I've looked in the mirror every morning and asked myself, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I am about to do today? And whenever the answer has been no for too many days in a row, I know I need to change something. Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Because almost everything, all external expectations, all pride, all fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. Remembering that you are going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You are already naked. There is no reason not to follow your heart. About a year ago, I was diagnosed with cancer. I had a scan at 7:30 in the morning, and it clearly showed a tumor on my pancreas. I didn't even know what a pancreas was. The doctors told me this was almost certainly a type of cancer that is incurable, and that I should expect to live no longer than 3 to 6 months. My doctor advised me to go home and get my affairs in order, which is doctor's code for prepare to die. It means to try and tell your kids everything you thought you'd have the next 10 years to tell them in just a few months. It means to make sure everything is buttoned up so that it will be as easy as possible for your family. It means to say your goodbyes. I lived with that diagnosis all day. Later that evening, I had a biopsy where they stuck an endoscope down my throat, through my stomach and into my intestines, put a needle into my pancreas and got a few cells from the tumor. I was sedated, but my wife, who was there, told me that when they viewed the cells under a microscope, the doctors started crying because it turned out to be a very rare form of pancreatic cancer that is curable with surgery. I had the surgery, and thankfully, I'm fine now. This was the closest I've been to facing death, and I hope it's the closest I get for a few more decades. Having lived through it, I can now say this to you with a bit more certainty than when death was a useful but purely intellectual concept. No one wants to die. Even people who want to go to heaven don't want to die to get there. And yet, death is the destination we all share. No one has ever escaped it. And that is as it should be, because death is very likely the single best invention of life. It's life's change agent. It clears out the old to make way for the new. Right now, the new is you. But someday, not too long from now, you will gradually become the old and be cleared away. Sorry to be so dramatic, but it's quite true. Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Don't be trapped by dogma, which is living with the results of other people's thinking. Don't let the noise of others' opinions drown out your own inner voice. And most important, have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary. When I was young, there was an amazing publication called the Whole Earth Catalog, which was one of the Bibles of my generation. It was created by a fellow named Stuart Brand, not far from here in Menlo Park, and he brought it to life with his poetic touch. This was in the late 60s, before personal computers and desktop publishing, so it was all made with typewriters, scissors, and Polaroid cameras. It was sort of like Google in paperback form 35 years before Google came along. It was idealistic, overflowing with neat tools and great notions. Stuart and his team put out several issues of the Whole Earth Catalog, and then, when it had run its course, they put out a final issue. It was the mid-1970s, and I was your age. On the back cover of their final issue was a photograph of an early morning country road, the kind you might find yourself hitchhiking on if you were so adventurous. Beneath it were the words, "Stay hungry, stay foolish." It was their farewell message as they signed off. Stay hungry, stay foolish. And I have always wished that for myself. And now, as you graduate to begin anew, I wish that for you. Stay hungry, stay foolish. Thank you all very much.
Steve Jobs from a speech he gave to the Stanford graduating class of 2005. A speech that I think is the most candid Steve Jobs we ever saw, the most honest. The only time that I know of he's ever spoken of his health issues in that way.
And dropping out of college. He was
dropping out of
frank
college
about it.
Yeah.
He's not usually one to talk about that either.
And saying, I think, what is probably his credo, which is life is short. Don't waste it living somebody else's life. And there's no question that he lived his own life
and is living
his own life. Yeah, I know, and I'm sorry that we are treating this as the death of Steve Jobs.
Well,
it is not.
It's hard to separate because he is leaving Apple as CEO, and that is huge. And he is leaving Apple as CEO because of health reasons. We don't know that for sure, but there's really no other reason that he would leave. And so
it seems significant. Certainly, the stock market is taking it seriously. The stock price has gone down 5.9%, $22 down. Tim Cook, the newly anointed CEO of Apple Computer, is their former COO. Andy, do you have any experience with Tim at all?
Not personally, although every time you talk to someone who works with him, you know that you get the impression that he can inspire, and he has the same amount of respect with people who work with him as the people who work with Steve Jobs, except for perhaps without the same sort of level of fear and intimidation. He's often credited with as much of success of the iPad and the iPhone line as Steve Jobs, really, by virtue of the fact that he was, according to people I've spoken with, he's a person who not only wasn't really locking in the engineering, but so much as realizing that in 3 or 4 years' time, it's going to be really important that we have an unlimited source of this sort of component or this sort of material, or we need to strike the deals with this sort of manufacturing company because there are only a limited number of plants that can actually machine a unibody MacBook or produce something like an iPad. So we got to make sure we start locking in those relationships early on, so that by the time people start trying to want to catch up with this thing we made, they will never be able to catch up with this thing we made. So if it had been anybody else but Tim Cook, that would have raised a lot of eyebrows, because I'm sure that there'll be nothing but confidence spoken of the selection of Tim Cook as CEO.
Well, and let's not forget Johnny Ive is still there, the man who, the brilliant designer who really is responsible for the look of all the Apple products right now, including the iPhone. He created the iPod and the new laptops, I think, too. Jobs had a good team around him.
Well, and I think that one of the things that we've all been to Cupertino at some point in time, and it's not at this point. It's not just Jobs. I mean, there is a culture there that has been generated over the last 15 years that is extremely robust at this point.
Right.
You have a lot of people who have that same focus. I mean, when you're in a meeting with folks at Apple, they have what they want to talk about, and there's not a lot of static. There's not a lot of joking around. Like when you're in the meeting, there is this is exactly what we're here to talk about. This is how we're going to move. And you know that came from the top down. And you know that it's going to be still part of the culture, whether he's CEO or not.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, Steve's legacy is this way of working, this way of thinking, and this laser-like focus on creating a beautiful product.
There are lots of examples of Steve Jobs and the stories that I've heard of Steve Jobs coming in and saying, no, we're not going to do that little thing, or we are going to do this little thing. And that stuff goes away. You don't have Steve Jobs stepping in and doing that anymore. But I have seen plenty of companies that can't escape from their legacy. No matter how many of the original people and original founders leave, organizations have a memory in that way.
That's right.
And Apple has got a very strong template, a very strong meme inserted to it. And I think it's not going to depart very far from where it's been.
It also helps that they've always been a company that really doesn't make, it's not four companies under one umbrella. It's always been one company that makes one suite of hardware and software that all work together. A lot of the scrapping that you see in a transfer of power becomes because the guy who's running the desktop division thinks that this should be a desktop company, whereas the woman who's running the notebook division thinks that no, desktops are dying anyway. I should be controlling things. We should be putting more resource into my division. So I don't think there'll be any really scrapping between divisions, because there never really was one. Apple has always been notorious for being the one company that every single head of every single product line was always meeting with each other to make sure they're not stepping on each other's toes, and that they're all like pushing the truck toward the horizon in the same lockstep.
If you're just joining us, about 1 hour ago, the news came first from Reuters, then from Business Newswire, a press release from Apple, that Steve Jobs had written a letter to the Apple board of directors resigning his position as CEO, recommending that his COO, Tim Cook, who apparently was named in the succession plan none of us had ever seen, to take over as CEO. Jobs himself will become chairman of the Apple board. Cook will take a position on the board as well. And that's about all that Apple has said. They've sent the press release out, the letter from Steve Jobs, saying, paraphrasing, and I'll paraphrase it, saying, I had always said if I couldn't do the job, I would leave. And in fact, that's what he is doing. Remember, Jobs has taken 2 medical leaves of absence from Apple Computer. This is not a leave of absence. This is a farewell. And it's very clear from the last line in the letter that Jobs sent the board, saying goodbye and thank you to Apple and its employees. The stock market's reacting fairly negatively, although I think that that's probably normal. Knee-jerk panic.
After hours trading down 5% is not that bad,
right.
Considering there's probably a few people wanting to do some profit taking before it goes down even further. 5%. You could expect when an iconic CEO unexpectedly resigns, it could be more than that.
Yeah. And we are endeavoring as best we can to get comments from others. I could start and maybe I will do this, a Google Plus hangout. So if you are watching and you're one of the lucky 9 that can get in there, and you have some thoughts and some comments, we'll get into Google Plus.
Slow news month, August.
It's been the most crazy news month ever, with Motorola, Google, and then HP, and now this. And it is a story that we all knew we were going to be writing at some point, sooner or later.
And I think that one thing that I'm glad that he's been able to be at Apple long enough to see is I think that the iPad in many ways is the ultimate creation for what he's focused on as far as simplicity and and to see it do so well. It's the rumor is that no one really knows, but the rumor is that, well, I think they have talked about it, is the iPhone really came after the idea of the iPad. So the iPhone was not the first thing. The iPad was like, this is what really needs to happen next. And but getting to that point was something that took him a long time, and for it to do so well and to prove that model, I think is great that he was able to stay in the company long enough to have that happen.
I said at the time, and I really think this is true, that the iPad was really the computer that Steve Jobs started Apple to build.
Right.
That was what Apple's goal had all along been, was a computer for the rest of us, and technology finally caught up with Steve's vision. And I think that's
the parallels are kind of the parallels are kind of uncanny because the original price target for the original Mac was under $1,000. They were aiming for $999, and when you outfit an iPad as a substitute for a notebook, where you say, well, I'll get the 64 gig model, I'll get the 3G so it can talk to other things, I'll get the keyboard, and I'll get myself a nice sporty little case, you wind up at about $899. So that's enough for dinner and a movie for you and a friend.
right, just the right amount of.
And it's perfect. I mean, it was. I remember the first month that I was using the iPad out in the open, and I'm sitting as I had been doing like for weeks before then, just nonchalantly, got my keyboard out. I'm doing my writing because it become my out of the office writing thing. And I'm looking at it and I realized that dang, this thing even looks like a Macintosh with a little friendly little screen in front of you, where you can just simply pick it up and take it wherever you want. It doesn't have to be rooted down to the office or any place else. So there's good ideas can be articulated 2 or 3 decades after they were first conceived.
Well, and I think that the interesting thing about the iPad specifically is that, I was talking to someone this last night, and they were asking, well, can you do work on it? I mean, are you really working on your iPad? And I said, no, I still work on work in my truck, in my laptop or my desktop or whatever. But I said, but I live the rest of my life with my iPad. That's the rest of my.
You go to the beach in your Corvette.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just like that's the thing that it's very rare for me to be without my iPhone or iPad, because there's so much of my life now that revolves around those two devices.
It's actually made me carry more computers around, because I carry the iPad and my MacBook Pro with me.
Right. And your iPhone, probably.
And the iPhone.
And when I need to work, it's one thing, but I think that, I just, I get up in the morning, I have Flipboard, and I sit there and I drink the coffee and read the the news.
I use
and
Reader, but the same thing.
Yeah, it's just the same type of thing. It's just amazing.
A couple weeks ago, I came up with an idea for a Kickstarter project where I think that we should develop a line of shells and skins for the times when, like, we're at the coffee shop or we're in their office. We realize that, okay, I'm sitting behind my Apple MacBook, I've got my Apple iPad next to it showing me a movie, and I'm also got my Apple iPhone. Can at least have like a really crummy Android-looking shell for the iPhone, so it doesn't look like I'm a complete hapless fanboy. But that's really the integrity of the Apple line. That's really the sort of stuff that you buy the best solution for what you need, and it just turns out that it comes up Apple, jackpot.
Yeah. We've got a Hangout going, and we've got it full, but for some reason I'm not able to get the video, so we'll get some video from that Hangout as soon as we can. We invite you, those of you in there, and actually Bradley Horowitz is in there. I'd like to start talking to you, Bradley, as soon as I can, but he left.
He's like, I'm out.
He says it's too busy, but I would like to ask, if you do join that Hangout, to mute your microphone, and then we'll call on you, and at that point you can speak. Otherwise we get so much noise going on in there. Triangulation, we're running a little late. I hate to break out of this too early. I want to make sure we all get a chance to say.
Kevin's listening to us.
Okay, Kevin Mitnick will join us in just a little bit to talk triangulation. And I don't know what's going on. Is it something I'm doing?
I don't know.
Oh, you're just not getting the video from
Apparently
the Hangout.
not, yeah.
Did you just have to install the codec just now?
No, I've had it for a long time.
And it's just not working.
I've hung out on here before, but this is all I get. Some anonymous person.
Maybe they're just trying to hide their identity.
They don't. We don't know who they are. I'll tell you what. Let's final words from everybody, and then we will go to the other set, and we'll start triangulation, because we got Kevin Mitnick waiting, and I'm sure Kevin will have some things to say about this. Kevin and Woz are good friends. In fact, it was Woz that gave Kevin Mitnick the computer that he first surfed the internet on after he got out of jail, on the screensavers. Andy Ihnatko, your final thoughts?
Final thoughts. There's always room for optimism. So it is very correct to make sure that we talk about the end of his tenure as CEO as opposed to the end of his life. That would be completely inappropriate. And that if anybody thinks that Apple is going to be stumbling over the next year or two, that's certainly not going to be the case. I'm completely confident. But yeah, certainly you think about. I can't help but think about when Charles Schulz announced that he was retiring the Peanut Strip. You know what it must have taken for him to make that decision, because that comic strip was not just his job. It wasn't just the source of his wealth. It was who he is, and that's what he most wanted to do. And so to think about how awful it must have been for Steve Jobs to make that decision to lay down the job that he always wanted to have and the job that he hoped to have for another 10 or 20 years, that's definitely a sad night.
Yeah, I mean, Jobs is only a year older than me, and so I can absolutely share what must be frustration and disappointment to be so young and not to be able to fulfill his destiny. And yet he has done so much and has changed the world, which I think really was his goal. You remember that when he was trying to hire John Sculley away from PepsiCo to run Apple Computer, he took him up on the roof of Apple and said, well, John, you have a choice. You can continue to sell sugar water to the masses, or you can change the world. And of course, Scully took the job, and I think Steve knew that what he was doing was changing the world.
I think there's very few people alive that have made more of an impact, on the world, for many. When you look at what he's done, in just the level of impact that Apple has on the way we interact, the way, it's not just the fact
love
that
it or hate it.
Love it or hate it. When you look at the iPhone and the iPad have changed computing, have changed phones. It's not just that a lot of people have them, it's that all of the phones look like them. It's not just Samsung, it's all of them look like that. And and the interfaces that we use here, whether it's on Windows or Mac, we're driven from that vision. And so, I think that he's made about as much of an impact as a single person can make in a lifetime. I mean, and so I think he's done very well. I mean, as far as that goes, and I think that he's completed a lot. It is
he
very
certainly
hard.
has.
It's hard to, and I think that I think the iPad is the pinnacle of all that. I think that if he had to leave Apple before that, I think it really would have been an incomplete situation. And I think as far as Apple goes, I think Apple is going to continue this trajectory. I think that it's almost an automatic trajectory over the next 24 months, and then after that, I think it's a fairly automatic trajectory over the next 5 years. I think 5 to 10 years down the road, we're going to see what the impact is of not having Steve Jobs generating that. And it may be there's a lot of experimentation that may be possible. There's a lot of things that hold up Apple because everything has to go through one person.
I do have to point out, not to be negative, but we've seen what Apple without Steve Jobs is like. We saw that.
We got one
after
try
John Sculley forced him out, and it wasn't good.
But it was before he had the same focus and created that culture.
And he did, and he came back, and he transformed that place.
He was the crazy founder that everyone kind of, we'll let him do that.
Right.
He
came back, he'd grown up, he'd learned, and he
was the
adult.
He was the adult supervision when he came in.
He left a vice president. He came back the czar, the king, Caesar.
Yeah.
The true test of Steve Jobs is now. He has known this moment was coming for many years. He didn't know when it would come, but he knew it was coming, that he would have to step down as CEO. And so he, of all people, is the kind who would put in place what he thinks is the best chance of his legacy succeeding without him. And again, he is stepping down as CEO. Even if he's remaining as chairman and remaining an employee of Apple, he is stepping away from being the person who's in all of these meetings and making all these decisions. So we will see the mettle of Steve Jobs now and how well his plans can carry on without him there every day.